We're here this afternoon with Dr. Yaron Brook and Dr. Onkar Ghate at the Ayn Rand Institute. The Berlin Wall was up from 1961 to 1989, and Monday, November 9th, marks the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall. What did the Berlin Wall actually signify?
Well, I mean, it really was a physical representation of, of what communism was, of this prison that was communism, of the boundary between freedom and communist totalitarianism. But what it really symbolized is how the communists had to keep their people in. That is, the wall was not to protect communism from Western invasion. It was really to prevent the population within these communist totalitarian countries from escaping. And I think in that sense it's a visual representation of what communism and totalitarianism really means.
Yeah, I mean, you've heard the term, I'm sure, that people vote with their feet. And what was happening in the communist countries, Germany in particular, was people were voting with their feet. They were trying to leave the dreary, dismal conditions of East Germany, which was like a prison camp. And they were leaving, I've seen statistics of 1,000 a day were leaving into West Berlin. And the East Germany and the Soviet officials decided, we're going to lose all our population if this happens. And they started, within 24 hours, they put up a barbed wire fence to prevent people from going. And that was what life was like in communist countries. This is what Ayn Rand called Russia. It was a vast prison camp. And it became physically a prison camp when they started putting up walls that people couldn't leave.
And the wall was I think the wall was in Berlin, but there were barbed wires and they were across the entire Iron Curtain and across the entire separation between East and West. There was some physical barrier that prevented people from leaving.
And it's hard for young people to imagine today, I think, but it was, they built a series of walls. At one point in time, they had a big area that was completely vacant, 2 walls on each side. And they did it so that when they could see someone trying to cross, and people did try to cross, which is why they kept building different kinds of walls, they would shoot them. They would shoot them and the people would bleed to death within vision of people in the West seeing these people trying to flee. That's what it was like and how much people opposed and wanted to escape the communist countries, that they would risk their lives in those kinds of conditions.
It truly was a set of prison walls. So people might remember the dramatic footage of the wall coming down 20 years ago. What is the ideological significance of the wall coming down, being removed?
And I think it represents the bankruptcy of the communist ideas and the bankruptcy of the totalitarian regimes that were in Eastern Europe. And people don't realize, I don't think they know exactly how these walls came down, but basically, everything reached a point in which, specifically in East Germany, people just started walking towards the wall. Masses of people were just fed up. They had rejected the regime. And 20, 30 years earlier, if that had happened, the guards would have started shooting at them, and it would have ended. But the moral authority of the communist state had so eroded by that point that the guards wouldn't shoot. So the people just overran the wall. And I remember the pictures of all these young kids sitting on the wall, and then they start slowly chipping away at it and knocking it down. So it really represents the bankruptcy, and really the moral bankruptcy, and the fact that its own representatives wouldn't even, defend the horrific practices of shooting people as they try to cross.
There were stories of at the time when the East Germans were massing at the wall, of the guards frantically calling higher officials that somebody make a decision and tell us we're allowed to shoot. We don't want to make this decision. And that is because, as Yaron was saying, it had lost its moral legitimacy. Communism, and more broadly, the whole socialist utopia that was promised with the advent of the communist in Russia with Lenin and Marx. By the end of World War II, nobody could take it seriously as an ideal. It was just a bunch of thugs. And it got to a point where they would have to reveal, we're just thugs, we're going to kill a massive amount of people, or we're going to let our system crumble. And there weren't enough kind of true believers anymore in the system, I think, to hold it together. And so these massive people were able to break through.
And worldwide, I think the symbolism is certainly the defeat of socialism. Socialism as an ideology died that day. And today, even the socialists don't call themselves socialists anymore, because it's not a respectable word. But again, I don't think young people remember this, but in the 1970s and 1980s, people were communists, they were socialists, they still believed in this, it was still an ideology. When the Berlin Wall fell, that whole ideological structure fell, and in a sense, anybody on the left today is either socialist, in hiding, they hide their ideology, or they're just nihilists, they don't believe in anything. There's no ideology driving them other than pure statism for the sake of statism. So it was a really pivotal event. Again, it represented a truly pivotal ideological event.
I mean, the 20th century ideological is an awful century. I mean, you have the World War I, World War II, you have imperialist Japan, Nazi Germany, the whole Soviet bloc. And this was the end. This is really the end of that whole ideology that is responsible for millions and millions and millions of deaths. So the 20th century is filled with really horrific events, but this is one of the greatest events of the 20th century, the crumbling of all this.